Have you ever stopped to think about how incredible it is that we can build a vaccine from just a tiny single piece of a virus's genetic code without ever touching the dangerous pathogen itself? Well, today we are diving deep into one of the slickest, most powerful tools in modern medicine, recombinant vaccine technology.
So that's the big question, right? How in the world do scientists take one little fragment of DNA and spin it into something that can train our entire immune system? It honestly sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but it's happening in labs all over the world. So let's break down exactly how it works.
All right, first up, let's talk about what makes this technology such a massive leap forward. This really is the definition of working smarter, not harder, when it comes to designing vaccines. So what even is a recombinant vaccine? Well, the key thing to remember is that it's not the virus. Not at all. Instead, we use these harmless, microscopic little factories, like the same kind of yeast we use to make bread, and we give them a specific genetic blueprint. Their only job is to churn out one single harmless part of the pathogen. And that little part, the piece our immune system needs to recognize, is called an antigen.
And here's where you get that aha moment. See, older vaccines, the traditional ones, often had to use the entire virus, just in a weakened or killed form. Now, they were effective, for sure, but there was always this tiny risk. Recombinant tech just completely sidesteps that whole issue. Because you're only using one purified piece of the pathogen, there is literally no way for it to cause an infection. Zero. It's a huge step up in safety.
Okay, so how did they actually make the thing? Let's take a little trip inside one of these microscopic factories and see how a strand of DNA becomes a life-saving vaccine.
It's this really elegant 5-step dance. First, scientists find the exact gene they need, the one that has the recipe for the virus's uniform, let's say. Then, they copy that gene and slot it into something called a plasmid. Think of the plasmid as a tiny circular USB drive that carries the blueprint. Step 3, they insert that blueprint into our little yeast factory. The yeast cell, just doing what it does best, reads the instructions and starts pumping out that one protein, the antigen, in huge quantities. And finally, scientists just collect and purify that antigen, getting rid of everything else.
But we're not quite done yet. That purified protein needs one last thing to be ready. This step is called formulation. The antigen is mixed with something called an adjuvant. And an adjuvant basically acts like a megaphone for your immune system. It yells, "Hey, over here, you need to pay attention to this." It's what makes sure your body really notices the antigen and builds a strong, lasting memory of it.
So we've built a vaccine. What happens now? What happens when it actually gets into your arm? Well, it's not a battle. You got to think of it more like a super realistic practice drill for your immune system.
So once it's injected, your body's first responders, these amazing antigen-presenting cells, they find this new protein. They show it to the commanders of the immune system, the T cells, who immediately sound the alarm. That alarm wakes up the B cells, which are basically the body's weapons factories. They start churning out custom-built antibodies designed to perfectly lock onto and neutralize that specific antigen. And here's the most important part. Your immune system creates memory cells. These are the veterans who remember that enemy uniform forever. So if the real pathogen ever shows up, the response is immediate and overwhelming.
I love this quote because it just sums it up so perfectly. We're not trying to start a war inside your body. The goal is simply to show your immune system soldiers what the enemy looks like. It's all about training, recognition, and memory, not about getting sick. But of course, no technology is a silver bullet, right? Every approach has its trade-offs. So let's take a really clear-eyed, balanced look at the amazing advantages and some of the limitations of this recombinant strategy. Okay, the pros are massive. These vaccines are incredibly safe, they're super targeted, and they can be scaled up for production really efficiently, which is a total game changer for global health. But the flip side of that precision is that sometimes the immune response can be a little too focused. This might mean you need those adjuvant megaphones we talked about, and you often need booster shots to make sure that immunity stays strong for the long haul.
Now, this all might sound very futuristic and abstract, but I am willing to bet that this technology is way more familiar to you than you think. Let's look at some big-name vaccines that are already out there, built using this exact method.
This is just so cool to see. The Hepatitis B vaccine has been around for decades, and it's made in yeast cells. The HPV vaccine that protects against cervical cancer, same deal, made in yeast or sometimes insect cells. And even some of the newest breakthroughs like the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine or the world's very first malaria vaccine are built on this exact same powerful platform. Different microscopic factories, but the same brilliant idea.
So if there's one thing to walk away with, It's this. Recombinant technology is a true game changer. It lets us create stunningly precise, incredibly safe, and massively scalable vaccines. And it does it all by teaching our bodies how to recognize a threat without ever having to actually experience it.
And that really leads to one last big question for the future. With this amazing copy and paste ability to design vaccines from scratch, what's next? What other tough health challenges out there could we start designing blueprints for? It's a really exciting time in medicine, and definitely a space to watch. Thanks for diving in with me today.